Good morning, I'm Dan Krasner, Executive Director of the Nonpartisan Research Institute and Government Watchdog Group, Integrity Florida. Joining us today is a coalition supporting open government and ethics reform are Barbara Peterson, President of the First Amendment Foundation, Joel Chandler, Executive Director of the Citizens Awareness Foundation, Brad Ashwell, Legislative Advocate for Common Cause Florida, and Catherine Barrett, Chair of the Tea Party Network. As a disclaimer, each organization's representatives' comments this morning are on behalf of their individual group only, as they may wish to speak with you about additional proposals beyond the three that the coalition jointly supports. Our coalition jointly supports three bills. Number one, for open government, Senate Bill 1648, a bill spearheaded by Senator Jeremy Ring, which passed the state Senate unanimously on March 26th by a vote of 39-0. Number two, our coalition supports that bill's companion, House Bill 1151, sponsored by Representative Dave Hood, which is currently held up in the House. Our coalition also supports SB 846, sponsored by Senator Jack Latvala, to strengthen the state's ethics laws. SB 846 passed the Senate unanimously by a vote of 38-0, which also took place on March 26. The House has yet to act on this ethics reform proposal. Senate President Don Gates and Speaker Will Weatherford jointly announced Work Plan Florida 2014 before the session started. Our legislative leaders specifically committed to continue to improve Florida's ethics laws in the 2014 legislative session. The Florida Senate website specifically includes SB 846 as part of the work plan objective to expand 2013 ethics reform. The Senate website is also tracking legislative progress on SB 1648 as part of Work Plan Agenda Item 5 to improve government accountability and efficiency. Integrity Florida applauds Senate President Don Gates and Speaker Will Weatherford for implementing lobbyist compensation audits and clarifying residency requirements for legislators. We encourage our legislative leaders to build on these small steps and pass major ethics reform and open government legislation in the remaining 2 weeks of the 2014 session. 3 weeks ago, the Florida Senate took action by unanimously passing open government and ethics reform laws. Our coalition is united in calling on the Florida House to prioritize and approve these good government reform measures. I'll turn it over now to Barbara Peterson to speak about the open government and public access to information legislation.
Thank you, Dan. Good morning, everybody. House Bill 1151, I'm told, will be the bill that will ultimately pass, if it passes. It's the companion to Senate Bill 1648. The House bill was heard about 2 weeks ago in a subcommittee, and it was amended to address concerns raised by the Chambers of Commerce. During that House committee meeting, the League of Cities raised numerous concerns that had gone unvoiced when the bill was in the Senate. And in those 2 weeks, the First Amendment Foundation and the League of Cities have worked very hard and very diligently to come up with some compromise language that will address the concerns of the League and still give us a very good reform bill. It is kind of unusual that the First Amendment Foundation and the League of Cities agree on something relating to open government, but in fact, we have reached an agreement. We reached an agreement about a week ago, and this morning I was sent a copy of an op-ed from the League president endorsing House Bill 1151 with our proposed amendments. This is a big deal for us because we don't, as I said, don't usually agree. House Bill 1151 is critically important, and it will be, if it passes, the first time in 20 years that the Florida Legislature has made any attempt to improve the public's constitutional right of access through reforming both the public records law, and there is a slight change to the open meetings law in that bill as well. So reform is critically important to us. We've been talking about it. I had talks with Senate President Don Gates about this last winter and about the need for the reform. House Speaker Will Weatherford serves with me on the Commission for Open Government Reform. he's very aware of the need to change our laws and improve them as well. One last point that I'd like to make, yesterday I sat down with my tracking list. We have about 125 bills on our tracking list. All of these would make some change, most of them new exemptions, to the constitutional right of access. I sat down yesterday and figured out that we're poised to pass probably at least 12.5 new exemptions, if not 24. This will be, I've been doing this, I've been with the foundation for almost 20 years. If this number of new, these are just exemptions that would pass. If this number of exemptions, we're looking at between 18 and about 25 that could potentially pass. It will be a record number of new exemptions and push the total number of exemptions to both the public records law and the open meetings law close to 1,100 exemptions. There were 250 exemptions in 1985, and now we have almost 1,100. So it's a concern for us that the legislature is very willing to create all of these exceptions to the constitutional right of access, but drags its heels on any attempt to improve our open government laws. Thank you.
My name is Joel Chandler. I'm with the Citizens Awareness Foundation. My remarks will be very brief. Open government matters because open government breeds good governance. I think it's instructive to note that Don Gates, who is arguably one of the more conservative members of the Florida Legislature, has been the chief architect of the legislation that's been proposed for open government. I'm about as liberal as they come. Yet he and I have had very collegial conversations leading up to the introduction of some of this legislation. I think it's instructive to note that we have folks from the Tea Party. As I said, I'm about as liberal as they come. This is a nonpartisan issue. Good government matters whether you're a liberal, whether you're conservative, whether you're independent. Particularly when you take into consideration the struggles that mainstream media is having today. This is an issue that the foundation that I represent is particularly passionate about. If you look at the case law, the body of case law for open government litigation in the history of the state, we have about 464 appellate cases. The vast majority of those were litigated by newspapers. I think it's safe to say that without newspapers and television stations, the citizens of Florida would not have open government law, period. As newspapers and mainstream media outlets struggle economically, there's a very clear trend, in my experience, to frustrate access to public records and open meetings. This is a wonderful opportunity for our legislature to improve and strengthen the right of access, not only for all citizens, but for the media. We cannot have effective democracy without a strong fourth estate. And the media, in my opinion, is under threat by not being able to do an effective job of reporting meaningful and time-sensitive news stories without the ability to gain free access to public records and open meetings. And I strongly urge members of the House, and in particular the Speaker, to push this bill through. It's important, it's meaningful, and as Barbara's mentioned, this is the best opportunity we've had as citizens of the state of Florida to strengthen the right of access, to know what's being done in our name and at our expense in more than 20 years.
Good morning, my name is Brad Ashwell. I'm with Common Cause Florida. I have the pleasure of talking about one of the best bills that's been filed this session dealing with ethics. And it's one of the bills that unifies us all here together. Yes, SB 846 by Senator Latvala. It, in a significant way, is a follow-up bill to SB 2, which passed last year. This legislation has sweeping ethics reforms applying to state officials. SB 846 applies to municipalities and extends protections to quasi-governmental agencies, special districts, a number of other features. Some of the key elements of the bill is that it creates a number of ethics reforms for these quasi-governmental agencies like the Florida Clerk of Courts Corporation, Enterprise Florida, all the corporations set up to further the mission of Enterprise Florida. and several others, and it basically extends a number of the ethics provisions in Section 112 of the Florida statute to their directors and board members. It also places limits on local officials as far as who they can lobby for. Basically says they can only lobby for the subdivisions they currently represent. It's a little confusing, and we're actually looking into the language as far as when it applies. Jeff really asked that question earlier. But we think it's a positive step forward, and we're looking to clarify that. It also creates ethics training requirements for local officials. The only House companion in this bill is 7511 by Rodriguez. That's pretty much the common element between the Senate and the House companion. It allows the Ethics Commission to self-initiate. It creates a limited self-initiation power for the Ethics Commission, which currently they have none. So it allows them to initiate in cases where someone's failed to file their financial disclosures and they've reached the maximum fine. I could go on and on. There are a number of other provisions that are very good about this. It's a good piece of legislation. We really need the House to either accept the Senate's bill, hear it, and pass it, or move their own legislation and adopt the language. Another piece of legislation I want to highlight is SB 602 by Senator Lodvala. I feel like the Senator Lodvala cheerleader today. But 602 is, the way I see it, is a pretty common sense piece of legislation. It requires that lawmakers reside in the communities that they represent. From our perspective, that's just good government. If we want our representatives to truly understand the problems their constituents face, we need them to live in the districts. There are a number of other bills we support that others are talking about here today, but I'll stop there. Thank you.
We'll be happy to answer any questions if everybody wants to just come a little closer to the podium. Of course, you have our, for open government and public access to information, Barbara and Joel will take the lead on those. And the three of us, Catherine, Brad, and I, are happy to speak to the ethics reform legislation.
This is for Joel. Senator Gates said he'd talked to you before coming up with the Senate bill that is now waiting in the House.
Yes.
Can you explain how you got interested in public records and what was the genesis of your...
For me personally?
Personally, and how this all started?
It's her fault. And yours, frankly. I was just a regular citizen reading newspaper articles during Sunshine Week. And back in 2007, I'm sort of a curious person, I decided to go to the county seat where I live in Polk County, Bartow. And I went to 4 or 5 different public agencies and made public records requests. And the totality of my understanding of public records law was just what I had read in newspaper articles. And I was turned away at the Polk County School Board. They demanded that I make my request in writing, that I had to identify myself, etc.
Do you remember your request?
Yeah, I asked for a copy of their health insurance policy. No personal information, just the policy itself, which, as it turned out, was available online. When I was refused, I went to the state attorney's office. The state attorney made a phone call and they produced the records. I subsequently had a meeting with the superintendent about 2 weeks later, and I was told that my experience was non-normative. So I waited a year, and then I went back and made a public records request for the most invasive thing I could think of, which was the health insurance enrollment information, which led to a denial. And then I filed
For all employees?
Anybody that was receiving tax-supported health insurance.
For all 67 school districts?
Well, I started with just the Polk County School Board, and they refused. Turns out they were selling the information. They've been selling it for years. They sell it to, in fact, one of the board members who refused to give me access to the records had used it himself for his political campaign to become a school board member. So I filed my first public records lawsuit.
Did you have any relatives that were in school districts that were employees? That ever worked for a school district?
Yeah, I have a brother who at one time was a school teacher.
What happened to him?
What do you mean, what happened to him?
He was a school teacher in Hillsborough?
I don't know, I'm sure it was Hillsborough or not, yeah. David.
Is he still?
No, he's not. In fact, I don't really know where David is. Last I heard, he was somewhere in Southwest Florida.
Was your public records request related to your brother?
No, that issue came up. I think he actually lost his teaching certificate. I don't know the details of that. That was one of the suggestions, that somehow this was a vendetta. It was not.
But your records request came after he lost his certificate.
I don't know. I don't know when he lost it. I couldn't tell you. So anyway, after I was denied access and I filed suit there, I ended up making the same request to all 67 school districts. Ended up filing 10 more lawsuits, won all of those, and ever since then I've been heavily involved with public records access.
What was the point of the 67 requests for the school districts?
Frankly, I wanted to see if they would give me the records.
So it wasn't a information request? It was just to see if they would perform the...
I wanted to see if they would comply with the Public Records Act, and they didn't. I mean, I only sued a total of 11 school districts. There were probably 30 where there was a clear cause of action. I just couldn't, at the time, couldn't afford to do more than 10 or 11 lawsuits. I've done a bunch more since then.
And I'm sure you've heard this from the League of Cities. They say your lawsuits are very onerous, your requests are very onerous. Do you agree with that sometimes, that they're onerous?
It'll come as a surprise. No, I don't agree with the onerous. I mean, look, I make public records requests for two reasons. One is that I do what I call audits, where I will go to a public agency, either in person or by email, and make a public records request for no other reason than to see how they're going to respond. And I describe that, I make the analogy to a state trooper. A state trooper who sits up underneath an overpass with a radar gun doesn't make anybody speed. All he does is document it when they do. That's precisely what I do when I do an audit. I have never litigated over minor technical violations. The only litigation that I've engaged in where there were clear, egregious violations of the Public Records Act, and I am completely unapologetic about that. The other reason I make public records requests is because there are projects that I'm working on that are actually meaningful to me personally, and I think potentially public policy issues. I really want the records. I'm not just doing it because I'm testing for compliance. I genuinely want the records. For example, the foundation that I work for, currently we're working on a project. We're doing a survey of settlement agreements that various school districts have entered into over the last 3 years. Last year, there were 3 children with special needs who died in the hands of the Hillsborough County School District. One of those, the school board is claiming they did not know about for 9 months after the death of this little girl, 7-year-old girl. So for 9 months, they had no idea this little girl died on their watch. So we just want to do a survey of settlement agreements to see if there's anything else like that out there. And what we've gotten are absurd demands for payment. The Seminole County School Board, for example, is demanding $8,000 for copies of settlement agreements, which could not possibly contain an exemption. These are legal instruments that have been filed with courts. They're not protected by FERPA. There's nothing exempt. And if they tell me, and I am, I guess, in some corners of the state considered to be litigious, after filing 200 or so public records lawsuits, if they tell me that I have to pay them $8,000, I can only imagine what they tell reporters or what they tell little old ladies. And I call it the little old lady test, and that's not intended to be a slur against petite, mature women. But if some little old lady walks into a school district and makes a public records request, what I care about is how she's going to be treated and whether or not she's going to get the records. I'll get the records because I'll sue to get them. But most people don't have the resources to do that. And frankly, most of you all don't. I get contacted on a very regular basis by reporters who are frustrated over and over and over again. I mean, you all are reporters, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You make a public records request and you're told no, or you're faced with demands for absurd payments. And it's my ambition to change that. All I want people to do is to obey the law.
The legal fees provision does not affect you at all on this?
Yeah, my income, I get a salary from the foundation that I work for.
What's your salary?
I'm not going to disclose that now. We have filed, we're in the process of filing with the IRS, at which point we will provide a 990. In fact, it will be prominently linked on the top of our website.
Why not disclose it now?
Because we're still sort of in the process of figuring out what our budget's going to be. I'd be more than happy to provide all that documentation. When I'm legally obliged to provide it, I promise it will be easily available and I won't charge for it.
But you're for open records?
Oh, absolutely. I want, yeah, absolutely. I mean, number one, the reason that I'm not subject to public records access is because I'm not feeding at the public trough.
But these legal fees provision in this bill it doesn't affect you?
My income is not affected one penny. I won't make any more money or any less money, whether the foundation files a lawsuit or doesn't file a lawsuit, whether somebody else files a lawsuit or doesn't file a lawsuit, it doesn't affect me at all. And the claims that I've somehow gotten rich through public records litigation is utterly absurd. I haven't. I've gone broke doing it.
Can I speak to the attorney's fees provision? Because this
Please.
is an important part of this bill. The attorney's fees right now, both under the public records law and the open meetings law, if you successfully sue an agency for a violation of the law, the court must award attorney's fees and court costs. That's been the law for as long as I've been doing this, or longer. This bill expands that slightly to allow an attorney to recoup the costs involved in determining what those fees will be. That could be a question of a couple $100, an hour's worth of time. It depends on the agency and how recalcitrant it is in terms of awarding attorney's fees. The problem we have in Florida, and one of the things this bill does not address, is that there's no enforcement mechanism in our law. There is no agency responsible for enforcing or even helping citizens when they run up against an agency that's denying their constitutional right of access. So it's incumbent upon the citizens to enforce their right by going to court. And attorneys are reluctant to take these cases because of the complexity of the lawsuits and the length of time. I'll give you an example. The city of Venice had a major violation of both the public records law and the sunshine law. It took months and months and months to litigate that case. It was a sole practitioner, and the city mounted a huge defense. Attorney's fees and court costs ultimately in that case were $785,000 given to the plaintiff's attorney. The attorney who took that case had to take out a second mortgage on her house to keep moving forward. So this attorney fee provision is critically important, and it's important to remember that the attorneys are being paid for the time they've spent. They're not getting anything other than their reasonable fees for the time they spent in litigating their entitlement to fees.
Are other lawyers who aren't public records attorneys, when they're battling the courts for their fees, are they recoup that time that they spend?
I honestly don't know, but I would presume that they have the same opportunity. It doesn't always happen under the open government laws, but it happens frequently enough to become a problem.
Barbara, can you talk a little bit about what you consider some important provisions of HB 1151?
Well, 1151, basically what this law does is it codify a lot of case law. For example, the Florida courts have said over and over and over again, you can't make a request or put the request in writing without specific statutory authority. This codifies that, because I'll go make a public records request and they'll say, put it in writing. I don't have to do that. Well, where in the law does it say you don't have to do that? Now it'll be in Chapter 119.
Why is that such an important?
Because it's a stumbling block. There are people who do not want to identify themselves, who do not want to put their request in writing, and the law says, case law says they don't have to do that. This simply codifies that. I think one of the most important provisions in this law that will address perhaps Joel's litigiousness is the training requirement, that we are now going to require appropriate public records training of all government employees. This is also an important point in Senate Bill 846. Last year, the legislature required ethics and open government training for all constitutional officers under Senate Bill 2. Senate Bill 846 extends that training requirement to elected city officials. So the more training, the more knowledge, the less chance, it doesn't get rid of the issue completely, but the more people know about the public records law, the greater the opportunity and the greater chance of compliance.
In the House version, what was taken out? Well, what provision was taken out at the Chamber's request?
Currently, under the public records law, If a government agency pays dues to an organization like the Chamber, using taxpayer dollars, the organization, will use the Chamber, would have to provide you with access to records relating to that membership. The bill, as originally drafted, both 1648 and 1151, expanded that slightly to say that if a government agency uses taxpayer dollars to join a private organization, that organization would have to provide access to information given to its general membership. So we would know what that chamber, what the chamber, for example, is lobbying for or against. That provision was taken out. Current law, however, says you get access to any records relating to the membership of the agency.
What are your thoughts about that being taken out?
You know, it was a good provision. We would like to know if they're taking taxpayer dollars, it's important to know if they're lobbying against the taxpayer's interest. I was disappointed, but I don't think it doesn't kill the bill for me. I still think there's so much good in this bill that we really need to get behind it and ask the House to move it forward.
Can you speak a little bit more about Senate Bill 846, which seems to have the most profound potential impact of all, in that lobbyists for special districts will now be forced to file financial disclosures? That's one of the...
Well, financial disclosure, we're all for transparency and proactive access to public records. But the only thing I can really speak to in 846 is that training requirement.
Maybe somebody else cares to speak about the impact of 1,000 special district lobbyists. 1,000 special districts exist in Florida.
Right.
And lobbyists to those agencies, which Governor Scott has once tried to scale back, would now have to be filing quarterly financial disclosure reports.
If you're a taxpayer-funded entity, like a water management district, you should be transparent with the taxpayers. Special districts should have a requirement that lobbyists seeking taxpayer money in terms of vendor contracts or other approvals from those special districts, they should be required to register and disclose their activities to the public.
Question about SB 846.
Oh, can I ask just one follow-up on that?
Sure.
Is that one of the points of resistance? Is that one of the reasons why the Florida House has not taken this up at all?
Well, certainly our state lawmakers are outnumbered by lobbyists nearly 12 to 1. The lobbying community and the influence of that community is very powerful in our state capitol. So any measure that looks to require more disclosure from our state lobbyists is certainly going to face at least some resistance, and I think you've heard that from the association representing special districts.
Question on SB 846. Does the prohibition on lobbying affecting local officers, does that include city commissioners? It doesn't seem to. Does anybody know?
Didn't explicitly.
Any idea why they're not included, or should they be included?
They should be. They should be. I'm not sure exactly why they were excluded. It wasn't really a highlight of the debate through the committees. County commissioners are included, so that's good. It's a step forward. As this is a step forward from last year, you could look at this as largely a step in the right direction that we can build on in the future as well.
And Brad, state legislators are also exempt from that, correct?
Right.
Yeah, and you have a couple of state legislators that would...
It would be great if it was
Indeed.
expanded to cover state legislators as well.
Our ethics laws should be fair. They should apply equally to all levels of government. Last year with Senate Bill 2 and Senate Bill 4, we had the beginnings of required ethics training for county officials and for state lawmakers. This year, Senate Bill 846 expands that to require ethics training for municipal, city officials, which is another positive step. But certainly the ban on local officials that would prohibit them from lobbying for lobbying for private clients before the state legislature. That's a one-way ban. And going forward, our lawmakers should apply the same rules to themselves that they apply to other levels of government.
Is there some irony that the Senator Latvala, who is leading this, is a lobbyist, a federal lobbyist, and there's nothing in this that would affect his practice?
There are a number of our state lawmakers that are active lobbyists before federal or local government, and they should apply the same rules to themselves. There's still time to amend the bill. There's still time for the House to act on Senate Bill 846 on ethics reform, and we'd encourage the House to make sure that every provision in the bill applies equally and fairly to all levels of government.
Why are these bills kind of tied up in the House right now? What's the why, the reason why?
You could ask that question of
Good
them.
question.
Yeah, I can see what Paul had to say.
I have no clue.
It's a good question.
I mean, what we know is that Speaker Weatherford and Senate President Don Gates, they promised ethics reform last session and they delivered. This year with Work Plan 2014, the Senate President and the House Speaker have again promised to continue to strengthen our state ethics laws. There's 2 weeks left and we encourage them to take action. I would just briefly highlight a couple other ethics-related provisions that have potential to be considered in these remaining weeks. Senate Bill 1328 by Senator Jack Latvala and its companion House Bill 1385 by Representative Dan Rallerson. This is on the calendar for the House floor. It would increase accountability for hiring and firing of inspectors general. Integrity Florida stands with our government watchdogs in the role of Inspector General at the state and local level. And in some ways, our internal government watchdogs are under attack. Sarasota County just fired their local ethics officer. Palm Beach County separated with their local Inspector General. Florida Trend documented our internal Inspector Generals in state government that right now serve at the pleasure of their agency head. And there's certainly been cases where it appears that we have government watchdogs being fired for doing their jobs too well, and that's a problem. So this bill would transfer the hiring and firing authority to the Chief Inspector General when it comes to our state agency Inspectors General. A related measure that we would certainly hope would be added to this bill or considered in a future session, that's Senate Bill 1020 by Senator Darren Soto, House Bill 855 by Representative Mike Clellan. That bill would increase transparency for Inspectors General reports. We have Inspector Generals at the state and local level, and they produce investigative reports and audits, but often those public records are not on the web for the public to know, for the media to know that they exist and to access them. We would certainly, Integrity Florida would encourage our lawmakers to put all public records online at no cost to the public. And a good place to start with that model would be with Inspector General reports to know what's going on, potential cases of fraud, waste, and abuse in our state government.
Well, while we have a second, I just want to highlight one possibly, one bad piece of ethics legislation that seems to be moving forward in the Senate. It's not clear whether it's going to move forward in the House, but SB 1474 by Senator Abruzzo. We've been alerted by several of the local ethics commissions that this will negatively or adversely impact them. It basically has a due process provision which inserts a hearing officer in the process. So if someone's facing an ethics violation claim, they have a right to pick their own hearing officer. It doesn't limit who these hearing officers are or detail what their criteria will be. That's definitely a good government concern to common cause. The big issues to the ethics commissions, as I understand it, namely the Jacksonville and Miami Ethics Commission, is that it's going to likely lead to costs. The hearing officers, they could be expensive. If there are a number of cases that could bankrupt the ethics commissions. It'd also be a defense they commonly invoke or a opportunity that they commonly take advantage of. So it's problematic. Senator Abruzzo has shown an interest in amending it. I know the Jacksonville Ethics Commission has given him amendment language. We'll see if he takes it. Right now, we oppose it. SB 1474.
And Integrity Florida applauds Common Cause, the League of Women Voters, for opposing that bill. Also, Senator John Thrasher voted against it at its last stop, but it's still moving. So, Senate Bill 1474 and House Bill 1315 are anti-ethics measures. In full disclosure, the Jacksonville Ethics Officer, Carla Miller, is on the Board of Directors of Integrity Florida. She was not consulted on this bill as it moved forward by Representative McBurney and Representative Lake Ray from the Jacksonville area. The Miami Ethics Officer, Joe Centorino, was not consulted on this bill. This would have a chilling effect on our local government ethics program. So now's the time for our lawmakers to move forward on ethics reform legislation that strengthens our ethics laws. Move forward on open government provisions that make government more transparent, not less secretive. Thank you, everybody.